So it's my pleasure to welcome you to our program this evening, Living Your Best Life, Developing Health Resiliencies, which is a hard word for me to pronounce because I'm French. This is an informative discussion with accomplished UCLA experts on how people can improve their overall health so that they become more resilient and satisfied as they age. My name is Anna Marie Spatteroo. I'm the current president of Women in Philanthropy and UCLA alum. I got my MBA here so many years ago that I don't want to talk about it. So. This event has been an exciting opportunity for Women in Philanthropy to reach out across campus and bring together experienced faculty from various departments to share information about tonight's topic. Women in Philanthropy at UCLA celebrates and inspires women's giving across the UCLA campus and fosters women's participation on campus boards and volunteer leadership positions. To engage the UCLA community, we hold events throughout the year, but that showcase different areas of campus or topics of interest. Our group celebrated its 25th anniversary in 2019. It now boasts 2,800 members who contribute time, talent, and treasure to every corner of the campus. And for those of you that were able to attend our 25th luncheon celebration, we had about 400 people that attended, and it was an absolutely incredible event. And I think it's on our website, so you can still have a look at it and see how much fun we had. These extraordinary women leaders give their time, talent, and treasure to every corner of the campus. And we have roles on many of the advisory leadership groups, and we hold positions within the UCLA Foundation. Information about the Women in Philanthropy program is on your seat. Tonight's program should be very enlightening and informative. As more of our population ages, it is vital to develop strategies that effectively ensure outstanding quality of life and enhance medical health. The panel of leading physicians in the field, which will be moderated by the co-chief of the UCLA Division of Geriatrics, will discuss developing strategies to increase resiliency and live better for longer. The discussion will include updated information and practical advice on topics that include heart and bone health, preventative care, nutrition, and social engagement in later life, which I'm sure a lot of us are already doing because we wouldn't be here if we were not socially engaged. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Brandon Koretz, MD and BA, our moderator for the evening. Dr. Koretz is a co-chief of the UCLA Division of Geriatrics and a professor of clinical medicine. He joined the UCLA faculty in 2000. He is also a Bruin, having completed his internal medicine residency and geriatric medicine fellowship at UCLA, and he's also a fellow MBA graduate from the Anderson School. Dr. Koretz, please give warm Women in Philanthropy welcome to Dr. Brandon Koretz.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Women in Philanthropy for having us here. We are deeply honored and very excited to be here. Before we jump into the program, we found a Tesla key. And as much as my daughter would really like me to come home with a new car, if you don't have your car key, we found it. Let's try this one more time. Can people hear okay? All right. So the unifying theme to everyone's work has to do with resiliency. So people ask, what exactly is resiliency? So a question for everyone here. In the last 20 years, have you or someone you loved had an unexpected bump in the road and had to face some stressor? Could be work, could be family related, could be health related. Raise your hand if in 20 years you or someone you've loved have had some unexpected stress. Fair to say? Okay. Resiliency is how you deal with that. Whether you deal with it well, in cases where you have a lot of resiliency, or not optimally, where you don't have a lot of resiliency. And we're going to be talking about strategies to build resiliency and how to study it, and how, at the end of the day, all of us can use some of these techniques to build resiliency in ourselves or in those we love or in our entire community. Does that sound like something worth learning about? Yes. Okay, well then that's where we're going to go. So the first speaker is one of my colleagues, Dr. Albert Shea, who is, and the way this will work, I'm going to introduce each person individually. They're going to describe their work to you. And then after we have a chance for everyone to be introduced, then I'll be asking some questions. We'll have a discussion. And towards the end, we'll open this up broadly for discussions from the audience, okay? So Albert Shea is the only endocrinologist based in the Division of Geriatrics. He has a particular interest in studying bone health, in particular, how people can maximize their bone health and their bone strength to avoid problems in the future. He is a clinician scientist, spending a fair amount of his time taking care of patients and a fair amount of time performing research. Albert, could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Absolutely. All right, can you hear me? No? A little closer. How about now? I can just hold this. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Dr. Koretz, for the introduction. So my work focuses on osteoporosis. And when I talk to my patients about osteoporosis, I often will ask them kind of what comes to mind. And the images that sometimes come to mind, or things that I frequently hear, are things like bone that looks like Swiss cheese, or a parent or a relative who ended up walking with a stoop posture over a walker, or a broken hip, or a nursing home. And so while the individual sort of image might differ for different people, there's sort of a unifying theme there, which is that osteoporosis can really become a potentially debilitating problem in later life. And so while it's definitely true that the most sort of dangerous complications from osteoporosis can occur later, the journey to osteoporosis actually begins decades earlier. And in the case of women, that journey really speeds up during menopause, 2 or 3 decades before you actually develop the problem. And so the reason we say that is that during menopause, people can lose a really large amount of bone density and bone strength over a really short period of time. And so my research really focuses on that critical period. And in particular, we're interested in answering 2 questions. The first is, why does this happen? And the second is, how do we prevent it? So in terms of the first question, why, we have a particular interest in something called gut permeability. And our theory, or our idea, is that during menopause, gut permeability increases, meaning that your intestines become more leaky. And when that happens, that gives the opportunity for some of the trillions of bacteria that actually live in our intestines to stimulate our immune system, which in turn causes bone to break down. And so to sort of experience, or to explore this theory, we recently completed a pilot study in about 65 women. And what we were able to find was that indeed, when people go through the menopause transition, gut permeability does increase, and that more of this can lead to more inflammation and lower bone density. And so going forward, we'd like to build on this pilot study, and our hope is to more rigorously explore some of the relations between gut leakiness, inflammation, and bone density in not just 65 women, but several hundred or several thousand women. And ultimately, if we're able to really confirm that gut permeability is a major driver for bone loss during menopause, then that can really help lead to new prevention strategies for osteoporosis. And so next, I'd like to switch gears and talk about sort of the second phase of our research, which is asking, how do we go about preventing this problem? And so in our view, the first step is really to come up with a way to sort of identify people who will lose the most bone during menopause before it even happens. And the reason that this type of individualized approach is important is that while some people will lose nearly 20% of their bone density over a short period of time around menopause, other people might not lose very much at all. So it's really important for us to try to figure out who are the people who will belong to which group. And so some of our early research has really focused on identifying some of these risk factors. And for the future, our hope is to really combine all these risk factors into a tool that our doctors can use to help women who are still in their late 40s forecast their bone health into the next decade and beyond. And so overall, our hope for the long term is that some of this work might help reshape the way we think about osteoporosis. Right now, we typically think about it as a problem that we need to treat after we get it, but our hope is to make it into a problem that we can think about preventing decades earlier. So thank you very much. I look forward to any questions you might have.
Great. Our second panelist is Dr. Dina Goldwater. Dr. Goldwater, how's that? It's a good thing I'm not singing in the opera tonight, right? Dr. Goldwater is an MD PhD who has training in neuroendocrinology, geriatric medicine, and cardiology. She is UCLA's very first geriatric cardiologist, and we are quite confident she will not be our last. She's amazing. She has a particular interest in looking at how we should be thinking about preparation for surgery, and in fact is starting a program called Pre-Cuperate, CV. Dr. Goldwater, tell us about your work.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. As Brandon said, I'm Dina Goldwater. I'm really happy to be here and talk about my work with you. I am a geriatric cardiologist. I'm trained in both specialties. I practice something called geriatric cardiology, which is not that common. It's a holistic approach to cardiovascular care. Most of my patients are over age 80, and along with their cardiovascular disease, they have other age-related issues and illnesses like cognitive impairment sometimes, or functional decline, or so many medical comorbidities that they're taking like 25 medications per day. And so the challenge becomes, how do we treat their cardiovascular disease in relation to everything else going on with them? And so what I do in my clinic is I work with my patients and their family members to come up with a plan for their care that makes sense for their lifestyle so that we can optimize their quality of life. So that's what I do in my clinic. I really have a focus on optimizing quality of life. And that's also what I'm interested in doing in research. So I'm here with you today because I'm very much interested in, as Brandon said, in maintaining resilience after cardiovascular procedures. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how I came to that research, so you have a little more understanding about me and the process here. So my PhD was many years ago, and I was studying the relationship between stress and depression, actually. And this was happening in animal models, and we were submitting these poor animals to stressful circumstances, and then we were looking at their brains. And what we saw is that after undergoing a number of days of stress, their neurons in their brains actually changed shape and lost connections with their neighboring neurons. And not only that, when the neurons changed shape, they were in the area of the brain that we know is related to mood disorders like depression and PTSD. So we know that there's a relationship between stress and mood disorders, and now we have some sort of functional basis for that relationship. And then I went back to medical school, and I wound up randomly in geriatrics and cardiology, but this stress background stuck with me because I was so deeply involved with how stress affects the brain and how stress affects the body. And so here I was dealing with my geriatric cardiology patients and looking at the stressful life events that these patients are undergoing. Sometimes they have heart failure exacerbations and they wind up in the hospital, and then they have to overcome that event. Or they undergo cardiovascular procedures and they have to overcome that event. And sometimes the patients do really, really well. And you would never know that they were sick or they underwent a procedure, and their resilience was incredible. But sometimes, and I'm sure you've all seen this in some of your loved ones or friends, somebody has a hospitalization or a procedure and the recovery is just really challenging. And it takes a really long time, and maybe it's like a year before someone's back to their baseline after undergoing a procedure. So, in cardiology, it's exciting because we can do a lot of procedures. We have a lot of technology, and we can help a lot of people live longer and have a better quality of life. But if they're going to come out of those procedures on the other side not doing so well, then we're not meeting our goal. So we have to figure out a way to optimize patients' resilience after these procedures so that they can meet that goal of maintaining their quality of life and maybe even having better quality of life than they had before they were going into the procedure. So I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about the domains that are necessary for us to address for patients who are undergoing a procedure. And I started thinking about this with respect to a stressor that I put myself through, which was a marathon. So I trained for a marathon relatively recently. And, when I was thinking about training for the marathon, I thought, it's just going to be a lot of time running, and I'll just increase my physical function, spending all this time running away from my family so I can prepare for these 26.2 miles. So little did I know that that's not all. It's not just the running. It's not just the physical function. The other things that I learned that I had to think about as I was training for this event was nutrition. What was I going to put in my body that was going to make it as strong as possible during my training and for the event to complete it as strong as possible? The other thing was sleep. I needed to be sleeping well, not only in the night before the marathon, but in all that time leading up to that so that the training went well. And then finally, something that caught me a little bit off guard was thinking about my mood and my optimism. Because, at some point when you're 16 miles in and you have 10 miles to go and your legs are like, I think I'll stop. Your mind has to have the power to say, no, we're going to keep going. We're going to make it through, and this is going to be fine. So those are the domains that I've been thinking about that are important for resilience. We need physical function, we need nutrition, we need really good sleep, and we need mood. And I would like to start thinking about incorporating all of those things for patients before they undergo a procedure so that we're preparing patients to undergo something that is traumatic, and that's really an event. So how do we go about this, and what do we know so far? So in the literature so far, there is something called prehabilitation, which is like rehabilitation or physical therapy that you do beforehand. And what we know in patients who do prehabilitation before things like hip replacements and knee replacements, they do better than patients who don't do that after their orthopedic surgery. Their hospitalizations are shorter, their recovery is shorter, and their quality of life is better. What else do we know? Let's talk about the stress reduction techniques or the mood. So for patients who undergo stress reduction instruction before undergoing cardiac procedures, they actually do better, just the stress reduction techniques. Those patients do better after cardiac surgery than patients who don't have it. They have shorter hospitalizations and better quality of life. We know the same thing about nutrition. Unfortunately, there has been very little study about sleep, but I also believe that is very important. So All of these studies have been done in isolation, the prehabilitation, the nutrition, and the mood. I think it's important to combine them all. So I'm excited to tell you that here at UCLA, we're going to be working with some of the rehab programs here in order to start a preoperative resilience clinic prior to cardiovascular procedures, where we're going to address all of these domains prior to the procedures. And the exciting thing about this is not only do I think that patients are going to benefit and do better on the other side of their procedures and maintain their quality of life and recover faster, but we're also going to be able to do research and learn about what makes resilience. The people who do really well, what do they have? Versus the people who aren't doing quite so well on the other side. How do we make them look more like the people who are doing well? So I'm excited to be able to share this project with you and that we're getting it started, and I'm happy to answer any questions along the way.
So now moving from a perspective of having an individual who starts to do work building resilience well prior to need, to an individual who's got a particular stressful event, a surgery coming up, and we're looking to build resilience prior to that, we're now going to broaden things slightly to look at patients, but also how to support people around those patients. So Dr. David Rubin is the Division Chief of Geriatrics and also the Director of the Multi-Campus Program in Geriatrics. He is an internationally renowned geriatrician and leader, and has been an incredible mentor for literally the rest of us on this stage. He's going to talk to us a bit about the work that he's done working with a particular population of people and the award-winning program that UCLA, under his leadership, has begun, the Alzheimer's and Dementia Care Program. Dr. Rubin.
Thank you, Brandon. About 7.5 years ago, one of my partner's patients, a man named Bob Drain, took me out to lunch, and he said, "I have a challenge for you." And his challenge related to his wife, who he loved very dearly, who had Alzheimer's disease. And he said, I want you to do something for people who have Alzheimer's disease. And so I took him at his word, and I looked around the country to see what was going on for people who have Alzheimer's disease, and found a small program in Indiana that was based at a safety net hospital that was a comprehensive care program. And shortly after Mr. Drain, his wife passed away, but not without a few bumps in the road. And I would get calls on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock and saying the caregiver had to go back to her native country. What am I supposed to do? Or I need legal papers. How am I going to get these from UCLA? And I was thinking, with someone who is very empowered, he was a very empowered man, just a great person, what about people who aren't as empowered as him? So he also introduced us to Carol and James Collins, who also believed in getting this program started and funded it so that we would have a pilot program of 250 people and do something to help them through their journey with dementia. The program is the UCLA Alzheimer's and Dementia Care Program. It started 6.5 years ago. We started seeing people, and now over 2,750 people have been cared for in this program. We currently have a census of about 700. And what do these people get that's different? If you ever have known anybody who has Alzheimer's or one of the other dementias, it's a journey. And you need somebody to go with you on that journey, somebody who can help you with the resources to make sure you're not alone, to make sure that your needs are met. And that's what we've created. We have 3 dementia care specialists. They are nurse practitioners, and they're all saints. They are just absolutely wonderful. The program has become a national model for how dementia care can be given and provided. It has been shown to improve the quality of dementia care. It improves patient outcomes, and it improves caregiver outcomes. And it saves Medicare money. So this is a terrific program. I was telling some people earlier last week, I was in Washington meeting with people from CMS about how to try to make this a covered benefit so that all persons who are appropriate with Alzheimer's disease in this country can get this eventually. That is the holy grail. So what does this have to do with resilience? What does this have to do with resilience? There's a saying that says that everybody was a caregiver, is a caregiver, or will be a caregiver, if you're fortunate enough. If you're not fortunate enough, you're the care recipient. So dementia affects virtually everyone's life because by age 85, about half people have signs of dementia. So that it's your spouse or you or your brother or your sister. It's so common. So I'm going to end with a story, and this is an absolute true story. On Sunday, I got an email from a very close friend, somebody who I did some leadership training with a number of years ago. She says, "Dave, I got to talk to you." So Monday was Veterans Day, and I said, let's have a cup of coffee. And she told me the story. She's 62. She told me the story of her sister, who was 65, and having memory problems and making mistakes. The sister has her own company. She's very successful. And she saw one of my partners who essentially made the diagnosis of dementia. And the sister and the husband and everyone is denying it, but you can't escape. And so this woman's journey is just about to begin. We spent a long time talking about it. And to be able to have a program that can help people through this journey, it's tremendously gratifying to us, but it's also so needed. So thank you very much.
And fourth panelist is Dr. Teresa Seaman. Dr. Seaman is both an epidemiologist and a sociologist and a card-carrying geriatrician. While she's not a clinician, she spends so much time with us that she thinks like one. While she has done many, many projects over the course of her career, she and I were talking tonight about how the one she's here to discuss is the one that really, really makes her smile. It's her passion and it's her love. If you could share with us the story about Gen X.
Sure. My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, and as Brandon said, and all of these folks know, I love talking about the latest program that I'm working on. But I thought I'd say a little bit about how it came into being because it speaks to sort of my journey. So as Brandon said, I'm one of the few non-clinicians, if not the only one, in the geriatrics division, and it's been a real pleasure working with all of them. And my background is in public health, and my training focused on really trying to understand why it is and how it is that people differ in the ways in which they age. And why do some people age very successfully? I have a 101-year-old father who's still out walking and writing papers. So I feel very lucky. But not everybody is so lucky. And so what is it that differentiates people in terms of why some people age more positively than others. And I did a lot of research early in my career trying to understand that, following groups of people as they got older, measuring lots of different things about them and their lives and their histories, and trying to understand what was related to doing better. And some of the things that kept popping out in my work and the work of others were sort of, I call them sort of the trio of staying socially engaged, really, really important, staying physically active, which all of us know. And the other was really sort of trying to do things that help you to maintain a more positive psychological outlook. Do things that make you feel that you're being productive, that you are enjoying yourself, and that you are still contributing to others. And I tried to think about, so now that I know some of these things, what can I do about it? What can I do to try to develop programs that will offer more opportunities to people as they grow older to engage in those kinds of things to help them age more successfully? And I ended up having the good fortune to work with some colleagues to develop a program that actually seeks to generate benefits in an intergenerational way. So not just helping the older adults, but helping younger children who they work with. And we call this program Generation Exchange. It's a program where we recruit adults 50 and older, and we train them to work with elementary school kids. And the idea is that they will go into the schools. We ask them to commit to working 10 hours a week during the whole school year, and that they will work with kids in grades kindergarten through third grade who may need help, a little more individual attention, et cetera, to do well, to learn, basically learning how to read in those grades. And the education literature says kids who don't read by the time they go to fourth grade are going to have a really tough time. Kindergarten through third grade is when you learn to read. After that, you're reading to learn. And so we're trying to ensure that these kids get to fourth grade and they can read, so they can do well. So the program is designed to generate benefits for the kids, but it's also designed to generate health benefits for the adults who are in the program. So it does so by being structured in a way that offers physical activity. You got to get to the school, you're in the classroom, you're walking around. They end up going on field trips with the kids, et cetera. It's very social. You're spending all your time working with kids, interacting with the teacher, and then we have a team of adults at every school, so you're part of this team and you meet regularly. And we have structured it so it's designed to be psychologically gratifying, hopefully. You're doing something in a social environment. The people who come to the program do it because they love working with these kids, so they keep coming because of the kids, not because of the health benefits to them, but they come because of the kids. And the teachers, I mean, within 2 weeks, you can see these bonds, not only with the kids, but with the teachers. We have a party at the end of the school year, and this year, 2 of the teachers threatened me. I mean, they were joking, but they were serious about, you better make sure that my volunteer is assigned to my classroom next year, because if they're not there, I will be coming to talk to you. And I was like, no worries, you'll have them, everything will be fine, we understand. But we do have some preliminary evidence of the health benefits to our older adults, which are really exciting. We have a regular and significant weight loss. The total weight loss over last year across all of our volunteers was over 100 pounds. We have one volunteer who's been with us for 5 years. She's lost 45 pounds. And her doctor apparently says, you know, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. People are walking faster. We've had a number of volunteers who started the program using a cane and they don't use them anymore. Blood pressure is down. Cholesterol's down, inflammation is down, and we just published a paper showing actual changes in gene expression. So this is a colleague of mine here at UCLA who studies how our interactions with other people, our social worlds, influence the ways in which our genes are active in producing the biological substrates that drive stress and other beneficial things. And we were able to show that from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, there were changes in gene expression that reflected reductions in pro-inflammatory behavior or activity, so less production of the inflammation that Albert was talking about, and also improvements in antiviral activity, so better fending off all the kind of infectious agents that we're all exposed to on a regular basis. So we're very excited. And we just heard recently that we're going to be getting some extra money next year, so we'll be going into our 6th school. And as Brandon and Dave know, my goal is to be in every elementary school in LAUSD, so I got a ways to go. But I think it's the best thing that I've done in my whole career, and I'm very pleased to have reached a point where I feel like I can take what I learned earlier and turn it into something that hopefully will not only benefit people, the growing number of people who make it to older age and want to stay healthy and enjoying things and feeling like you're contributing, but also hopefully helping these younger generations. And we're in the schools in, South LA, where these are low-performing schools. These are kids who come out of really tough backgrounds. And so if we can help these kids be more successful, I feel like that's also making a real societal contribution from our older generation. That's what I'm up to these days, having a really good time. Thank you.
Let me pose some questions to our panelists. And the first question will be one that actually I'll ask everyone to answer. We live in a world where there are news stories bombarding us constantly. And many of you mentioned how stress and modulation of stress can be helpful to people's lives. So in the spirit of helping all of us eliminate some stress from our lives, is there one health story that relates to your work that introduced some myth and you just want to completely dispel it for us? Something that's completely true that we never need to worry about again. I stumped the professor. There we go, yeah.
So I guess I would say the one thing that's really become clear to me at some level is the degree to which we all retain an immense amount of plasticity and ability to change, even well into later phases of our lives. And I think that's like a myth was that, aging was this inevitable decline and, basically just you live with it. And it's not true. There's just this amazing amount of ability to change. We have some people who are well into their 80s in the program, and they're walking faster and their blood pressure's coming down. And I mean, doing things to age more positively, it's kind of never too late.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you. Dave?
I will say, and this is something that I learned actually relatively recently, is we always think about caregiving, and they actually frame it as caregiver burden, and how much work it is, and how disruptive it is, and that is true, but there are positive aspects of caregiving. And I've been impressed by how many people actually enjoy giving back to their parents or their spouses or being there for them. And what we just have to do is make sure that that wheel, when it gets started, it doesn't get out of control so that it also destroys the caregiver. But being able to care for people you love is actually a benefit.
Both of these comments, I think, help us to reframe things that maybe were previously negatives but are actually quite positive. And Dina, in your discussion, you mentioned how mental attitude, mood, hope, those are very important things. Can you sort of expound on that a little bit?
Well, if I was going to answer the same question, I was going to address the mood part of it. What I've learned both in caring for patients and from my work and some of Teresa's work is that the mind is very, very powerful, and there is a real power in a sense of purpose, in a sense of you have something to contribute. And I think that applies to the caregivers, and I think it applies to older adults in Teresa's study. And it applies to patients who are trying to overcome cardiovascular procedures. What are you looking forward to on the other side of this thing? And And even if the body is a little bit weaker, the people with the powerful mind, the power of the positive thought, they do better. And we're learning that that has implications for gene expression. So this is not just all, meditation, myth kind of stuff. It really gets down to the biology of things. And I think that is really exciting. And I'm excited to learn and study more about that.
Great. Thank you.
So I think the way that I would answer this question is actually very similar to the way that Teresa did. When I often see my patients in clinic, many people have this sense that having osteoporosis was inevitable, or that it's just a natural part of aging, that it's going to happen to you. And part of it is true. Our bodies are programmed a certain way, and many people will lose bone density over time. But the truth is that not everyone has to break something. And while we do have medications that can help with that, a lot of it also has to do with things that Dina's talking about: outlook, staying motivated, making sure we stay active, really exercising, keeping our muscles strong, keeping ourselves on our feet, and making sure that we take care of our nutrition. So I think the one sort of misconception that I hope to address today is really that talking about osteoporosis or getting it is not this sign of entry into the last phase of your life, if you will. It's really something that, yes, can happen, but you have a lot of control over, and that you can really address yourself.
The next question that I'd pose has to do with physical activity and exercise. In each of your discussions, you made some reference to physical activity. Based on your work, are there one or two pieces of advice that you'd give to everyone here specifically about exercise and the value of it? Albert, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So if we think about it if we think about osteoporosis on a very basic level, it's that we don't want you to break a bone. And the reason we don't want you to do that is because if you break a bone, it causes a lot of pain. Sometimes you end up needing surgery. Sometimes you end up in a long recovery period. And that can have implications for your quality of life and things down the road. And so one of the most important things to making sure that we don't break anything is making sure that we don't fall. And so there are a lot of exercises that are very useful for that. And in particular, I think the ones that keep our lower body muscles strong and also our core muscles strong are especially important. And these are things that we can do either by ourselves in the comfort of our home. We can work on it in the gym if we want to do that. And so there are a lot of ways to do that. And I think that can have just as important of an impact on your overall bone health as any of the medications that we can talk to you about.
The way that I normally address exercise in my clinic, in my cardiology clinic, is that in general, you can always do more physical activity than you're doing right now. And I think it's really important to figure out a way to make that happen because, there are no medications that we can give that are as good as physical activity. So the best thing that you can do for yourself to maintain your health is to move as much as possible, as often as possible. And as Teresa was saying, there is an immense amount of plasticity in aging. And so even if patients have become a little bit more sedentary over time, that doesn't mean that that trend is going to continue. You can always pick back up and go and gain more activity and do a little bit better over time. So I just want to encourage everyone to just keep moving as much as possible.
in my clinical role, I talk to my patients about exercise, and the one thing I tell them is you have to do it every day. Every day you're going to eat. If you're going to fast, you don't have to exercise. But every day that you eat, you have to exercise. And it really doesn't matter what type of exercise, although I recommend swimming because not many injuries with swimming, and this is the place to do it. But whatever exercise you like to do is the one you should do. And you need to build it into your schedule. You have to say, today I'm going to do it from 8 a.m. to 8:30, and tomorrow I'm going to do it between 2 and 3:30 or whatever, but make it a part of your life. Because you say, oh, I'll start it next week, or I'll do it sometime later this week, you just won't. So it's got to be built into your life. It's got to put it on your calendar. I have this little trick that I've been doing for 30 years. It's in my calendar, and it says, do not book. And sometimes that do not book is at 6 o'clock in the morning like it was today, and sometimes it's 11:30 in the morning. So, but just make sure it's there.
So I guess what I would add is a couple of things that have always struck me that we don't think about, or we think that to exercise means it has to be really vigorous or it's not worth it. And that you have to do a certain amount or you shouldn't bother. And I think what the evidence says is neither of those things is true. That every little bit, as Dina said, just get out and even just get out and walk a bit, it all helps. And I also, like Dina, am a big runner. And I always remember the first time I was training for a marathon, and the guy who was coaching us, he said, look, there are going to be days when you're supposed to do 6 miles, and you just can't do 6. He said, the answer isn't to say, well, if I can't do 6, I won't do anything. It's go out and run a mile. It's like putting money in the bank. Every little bit that you do helps. And so I think it's really important to think about, maybe you don't have time to do your full exercise, do something. Get out and walk around. Even walking, doing moderate kinds of things, it's really beneficial. It really helps. It has the same kind of benefit as people who go out and run marathons.
Thank you. So now I'm going to ask each of you, if you had the ability to write a prescription for social activity, what would the benefit be, or what might you advise people to do? Teresa.
Brandon's looking at me because before I got into doing my Gen X, I studied social relationships, was my big area of research. So having more is better. You should always, having one makes a big difference. There's none versus any is the big difference. And the other really important thing to bear in mind is you need to do your best to ensure that these relationships are socially positive and good. We've evolved as a social animal, right? We've always lived in groups. So it's not very surprising to think that the other people in our worlds have important impacts on us. And it's also not surprising to realize they can be positive or negative. And so the research that I used to do, and still do at some level, really has shown that socially supportive and positive kinds of interactions have all kinds of health benefits. They're really good for you across your whole life course, starting when you're born and going all the way. But socially negative kinds of interactions, feeling you're being criticized, not supported, getting in arguments, they have hugely detrimental impacts because we're very socially sensitive. So you want to have these social engagement, but you want to try to make sure it's not around having conflicts and arguments with someone. That will not be beneficial to your health.
So I have to confess that I am a terrible introvert. And my idea of a really bad time is going to a cocktail party. I would rather hit myself over the head with a hammer. That said, you can be an introvert and still be engaged. And I think that for me, it's connecting. It's that whole issue of connecting and doing something meaningful. And much of my work is almost everything I do in my work is meaningful. I'm incredibly blessed. But even my avocational activities, I'm always working on a project. I'm writing something. I'm connecting somehow or another with things that are meaningful to me. So that word meaningful is really what I would recommend.
So Brandon was asking about what kind of prescription you would give for social activity. I'm going to bring this back to a study from the world of cardiology. So in cardiology, there are patients who have peripheral vascular disease, which is a blockage in the arteries in the legs. And when patients are walking, they get cramps in their legs. And there's not a whole lot that we can do for this. And sometimes we try to give medications, but it turns out, and we tried to do other procedures to open up the clots. But it turns out that the best thing for this disease is exercise. And they did studies to try and figure out what kind of exercise is the best. And they looked at people who went and were given a prescription for exercise to go exercise on their own, and they were supposed to just go on a walk. And then the other group of people, they looked at people who went for a walk together. So people who were walking in groups. And it was the people who were walking in groups, everyone walked the same distance, but it was the people who were walking in groups and walking together, they did better than the people who were walking alone. So if I had to give a prescription for social engagement, I would say mix it with the exercise so that you kill two birds with one stone. And it keeps you accountable, it keeps your friends accountable, and it makes something that maybe is not that enjoyable much, much more enjoyable.
So after completing the 56-question personality test, it was also concluded that I'm an introvert. But what I like to do is give an introvert perspective on this. So I think my answer is in some way a combination of both of yours. So in college, I was obsessed with trying to weightlift. And so I don't know if it's apparent to you why. But you know, I found having a workout buddy was both socially rewarding because we'd be doing something and we wouldn't really have to talk to each other while maintaining our sense of social interaction. But we'd also keep ourselves accountable, you know, and so it sort of made this thing where, you know, one person couldn't really bail on doing it without sort of affecting the other person's ability to do what they wanted. And so it's just a slightly different perspective, but I definitely agree with what everyone has said so far.
Great, thank you. So the last question I'll pose before opening this up a little bit for discussion is, if you wanted to give everybody one piece of advice to maximize their quality of life, what would that one piece of advice be? And it could be their quality of life or the quality of life for those they love. I'll let you think about it for a sec. Dave, you want to go first?
So, who knows where it is? All right. So, I had this discussion on Monday with this friend of mine who is going to go through a very difficult time with her sister. And she said, you know, the people always say that live every day as if it's your last. And she says, I don't buy it. And I said to her, I don't buy it either. Because if you did that, you wouldn't think about the future at all. But I think what you can do is say, reflect on every day and say, I'm grateful. I am grateful things could be so much worse, and things could be things may be worse at some point, but today was a good day. And just take stock of yourself and say, thank yourself and pat yourself on the back. So I think saying good things about and thinking good things about yourself.
Teresa?
So I think sort of along the lines of what Dave's saying, I think it's finding something that is meaningful to you, gives you a sense of purpose and enjoyment. For those of us who are pretty social, I would say maintain those social relationships, stay socially engaged. I'm not an introvert. I'm very social. I'm the big social butterfly in my family. And I get really depressed and down when I have long periods where I'm not interacting with other people. And so for me, it's staying socially engaged will make all the difference in the world. But in deference to the Alberts and Daves of the world, I know they get just as much enjoyment by doing the things that make them feel good. It's knowing what that is and making sure you continue to do that because it keeps you, I think, in a happy frame of mind, and that will be good.
Good. Dina?
So I don't repeat what they said. I would say that everybody experiences stress to some degree relatively frequently. And I think one of the things that we can do to help ourselves on a regular basis is learn some stress reduction techniques. Because not only will that improve your day during that time, over time, your ability to control your stress response to something that is coming at you will greatly benefit you overall. And not only will it improve your outlook and your ability to deal with things in life, it'll also maybe improve your relationship with others because you will have more control over your own emotions. So find a stress reduction technique that works for you. For some people, it's exercise. For other people, it's meditation or yoga or just taking time and sitting quietly or listening to whatever that is for you. Find it and make sure that you have time during the day or during the week to make that happen.
Okay, so the osteoporosis doctor in me right now wants to answer this question in a very specific way, which is, it's okay to take your Fosamax. And despite what you read online, it's okay. But I'm not going to say that. In the spirit of answering the question, I'm going to actually, this is actually something my fourth grade teacher, Miss O'Connell, suggested to us. And since she said, I'm sure many of you have already heard of this, but I think it is actually a really good sort of way to go about your daily life, regardless of where you are, you know. And so she said, just every day, do something, whether it's small or big, that you think is sort of nice, that you otherwise wouldn't have done. And, you know, I didn't really understand what she was talking about as a kid. Maybe I was just not very advanced for a fourth grader. But once I sort of reached adulthood, I could sort of understand what she was saying, you know, regardless of, you know, where you are in your life. If you sort of step back and you say, well, what can I do today that's nice? It sort of helps you to think about the things that are important to you. And in doing something like that, it also helps to, you know, get at meaning in life and all these other things. It can help inform social interactions. And so, you know, having sort of thought about this for a few years now, I think that is actually something that could be very helpful.
Great. Just time check. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions from, oh, very good. Yeah. Okay.
Check. I could talk loud. We'll make you even louder. Okay. Oops. Whoops.
I have a question for Dr. Rubin and Dr. Goldwater. I'm fascinated with this idea of pre-rehab, and it just seems there's so many procedures that you could do that for, whether it's knee surgery or arm surgery or whatever. Are you thinking of that, and are we going to spread this?
Ideally, yes. I think that there's a growing voice in the world of surgery, in multiple different types of surgeries: orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, cardiac surgery. Everyone these whispers are getting louder. How do we make people better prepared for surgery? So while we're here going to start with the Recuperate CV clinic, which is for cardiovascular procedures, I think if we can get that up and rolling, it is certainly something that we can distribute for sure.
If we want to bounce back and forth, but is there anyone?
Is it on? I'm kind of curious about the leaky gut. Is there something we can do to prevent this leaky gut?
The leaky gut. So we don't currently have anything that we know is very effective for that purpose, because most of the studies that have looked at leaky gut are primarily in animal models. So most of what we understand about treating leaky gut would come from those sort of research. And at least in that literature, certain probiotics actually can reverse or at least help leaky gut. And so one of the studies that is especially well cited in the osteoporosis literature, at least, is there's an equivalent for culturelle actually that when given to rats prevented gut leakiness during menopause, or during the rat equivalent of menopause. There's another mixture of probiotic called VSL number 3, which is basically a combination of multiple strands of bacteria that has potentially those kind of benefits. But what I would say is that before we can really start advocating that for use in people, that just hasn't really been shown, or we don't know if that's true yet in people.
Right behind you.
Thank you. I actually have a comment. I think that the situation of aging is harder in Los Angeles, in part because our economy is based on the entertainment business, which tends to be young and stress a lot of superficial, I can say it, I wasn't it, but it's harder because at a certain point you feel you become invisible and you're not contributing in the same way. And yet what I find encouraging is in the public schools, in certain public schools in LA, they're teaching about the blue zones, which sort of is what you're all saying. And one of my grandchildren interviewed me 2 months ago. I have no memory of what my answer was for an hour was. And he's taking a course on elders. And he's in 8th grade. And I'm going next week. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this class. But he's taking a whole course on elders. And they're trying to have, because it used to be elders were respected. And we aren't as much anymore. Like law firms used to keep their partners forever and they gave you an office and you were the gray hairs that people would go to for advice. Well, now, if you don't have a book of business, they just throw you out at a certain point and give you your pension, whatever it is. But I think it's encouraging that the schools are trying to teach. And I think that there's, like at UCLA, some of us have become involved with some of the students, and they're not elementary ones in need. But I've mentored a lot of students here because they don't know what they want to really do and how to do it and everything. And it does give you a sense of purpose. But I think the blue zones are being taught in the school. I had never heard of them until my grandchildren were all talking about them. And when you think about it, it's sort of, they embody what you're putting together in a very rough manner. And we'd all be better off if throughout we knew about it. So, what you're doing is so amazing, I think, and the proactiveness of proactiveness of osteoporosis, medicine should be more proactive. And historically and presently, it's mostly reactive. But a lot of people, we're going to grow, I think we're all going to live longer than our parents did. And yet, we've got many years, and how are we going to be productive and feel we're making an impact? And yet, law firms are laying you out to pasture at a certain point. The entertainment business doesn't want. I was the oldest woman at my studio at 70. Yeah. And most of the others that were older were 40. It's a young place. And it's like all of a sudden you become, and in LA it's worse, I think, because of the business.
Yeah. The Los Angelino, thank you for your comments, the Los Angelino in me and the geriatrician in me and the Bruin in me would conclude that clearly everybody should live in a blue zone, because otherwise you have to live in a cardinal zone and then you're a Trojan fan and that's not okay. So thank you. I think we have time for one more.
First, I just wanted to say thank you, because I could literally relate to every one of you on a personal level, on a family level. Is amazing. And I also want to thank you for your research, because that's what changes the world. It's amazing. Quick question on hormone replacement therapy. Any connection with that and the leaky gut, osteoporosis?
So that also falls under the we need more information kind of category. At least based on the animal studies and based on some of our pilot data, it does look like losing estrogen or making less estrogen after menopause does increase the leaky gut. So one would think that giving the hormone back would maybe reverse that, but we don't know if that's actually true yet. The other issue is that even if hormone therapy can reverse that, what would be the appropriate dose so that it would be safe and it doesn't affect some of the other safety issues that have been associated with hormone therapy in the past. So I think that's a very interesting idea, and one that we're certainly interested in looking at, but there's more that we need to know.
On behalf of my colleagues, we would all like to thank you collectively as Women on Philanthropy for having hosted us here tonight. This was a great pleasure and privilege. And we'd also like to thank each of you individually for being so gracious and giving your time at the end of busy days to come talk with us and learn from us, hopefully, about some things we find to be very important. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
It's my turn to give some thanks. I would like to thank our panelists, Brandon Koretz, Dina Goldwater, David Rubin, Teresa Seaman, and Albert C., and the guests for attending. I certainly could relate to a lot of that too. I'm, of course, postmenopausal. I don't exercise enough. My husband is facing his second hip replacement surgery. And unfortunately, my 92-year-old mother, who lives in France, has dementia, and my sister is taking care of her. On the positive thing, I'm an over-engaged community volunteer, and don't have enough time to read all the books that I would like to read. But it was really a formidable, excellent evening, and I thank you, all of you, for presenting it and attending. We have our next Women in Philanthropy event, which will be in the winter. It's going to be a panel discussion on the impact of women on elections 2020, and that would be in April 2020. And if possible, if the panelists can remain a couple more minutes, if there are some individual questions that people would ask, that would be really appreciated. So thank you all, and see you next time.